the session is about. So this session is really about multi-stakeholder partnerships. To get what is the question. So it's really focused on scaling digital agricultural solutions. So the whole suite of data and tools related to digitalization that can help us in our response to climate change within agriculture. And in this session, we're going to hear about the partnerships that are being formed, the partnerships that need to be formed, and we'll think about how we can jointly make this happen in the next decade or so. So that's the whole focus of this session. So my name is Dhanush Dinesh. I'm the founder of a new initiative, a new organization called Climate, which is a think and do tank for food and climate. We were just launched at COP26 in Glasgow. And as you can see in our logo, there is a bridge in between climb and eat. And we want to become a bridge between the climate and food communities and between science and policy. And we hope to be engaging with many of you over the next few years, working on these issues about digital agriculture. So what really inspired us to think about multi-stakeholder partnerships was this new partnership that was formed between Bayer Crop Science and Microsoft to utilize the potential of digital tools and cloud-based data to really scale out solutions to farmers. So when I actually saw this, I was discussing this with Gabriela Burian at Bayer, and we had this idea, why don't we bring this to the conference, the ICT4Ag conference, and hear from other stakeholders as well, so that we can build on what Microsoft and Bayer are doing and expand that. And that will be the narrative of today's session. So let me just dive straight in and invite Sachi Desai, who's from Bayer's Digital Agriculture Division, where he's Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships. He's also with the Climate Corporation. So he's been leading this partnership on Bayer's side. So let's hear from him first on his take on this partnership and where should we go in the future. And then we'll hear from Vineet from Microsoft on the other side, and then we'll continue to build on that narrative. Sachi, over to you.
Thank you, Dinesh. Thank you for the invitation, everybody, and excited to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, which is bringing digital capabilities to the agricultural and food industry to bring it forward to help us deal with the various megatrends that we see, growth in population, changing diets, being more protein rich, being more sustainable and environmentally conscious, providing greater nutrition, and providing greater awareness of their food, how the food is made, how the food is provided, how their clothes are made, etc. So as Dhanush stated, this past fall, we announced publicly a partnership between Bayer and Microsoft to develop and commercialize new capabilities, solutions, and services for the food and ag industry to digitize and help address these different questions, trends, and needs. Often I've heard, why isn't digital further along in agriculture? I hear this from a variety of people. Why are we not able to do some of the things that people believe they can do in other industries, such as banking or et cetera, where you can see where your money is moving, or you can see, you can make a purchase and be shown items that are very relevant to you. And often it is, for every digital ag capability you build, you have to start at the same base, which has a high barrier, creates a artificially high barrier to entry. So you need to understand what the field is doing, and you need to understand information from equipment and satellite imagery, very complex digital problems that have everybody starting at point zero instead of advancing on. In computers and other industries, you've seen companies like Microsoft provide tools that allow people to skip that step and just focus on the problems themselves. And you see great advancements such as services on your phone, apps, et cetera, to hail a car, to make a food purchase, to do banking, et cetera. And so our partnership is really about working together to empower the industry and the people within the industry to build these solutions and services that can provide these different capabilities to the industry to move forward. One of the things that I like to really stress is we found in Microsoft a very compelling and complementary partner no one has the ability to bring digital scale the way Microsoft does, the way to engage enterprise businesses the way Microsoft does. We believe at Bayer, we are the preeminent organization in understanding food and agriculture, understanding the farm gate, especially understanding the needs of the growers and how the growers can support the industry. And so we believe our expertise on that side with Microsoft's expertise on the digital enterprise side really allow us to provide these kinds of services and help move agriculture and food further along on the digital journey.
Thank you, Sachi. And that was really compelling what you mentioned, how behind agriculture is to other sectors in terms of digitalization. And really this partnership is about getting agriculture ahead and or on par with other sectors and even ahead of them perhaps. Well, it'll be great to hear you noted the importance of complementarity that Bayer and Microsoft are bringing. So I'd like to go on to Vineet Durrani, who's actually the director for Microsoft Cloud for agri-food sector. So over to you, Vineet, and hearing from your side, how do you approach this partnership? Because Sachi talked about these barriers that farmers face, for example. So how do you approach this, and what is your vision for this partnership?
Yeah, thanks, Tanush. Am I audible? Yeah,
yes.
Cool. Yeah, Saji encapsulated well. We've been at this problem for the last 5 years, starting with our Microsoft research team, and obviously, Microsoft is really great as far as the tech and the scale that we bring as a technology and an engineering company, software engineering company, especially with the advent of the cloud technologies that we are at the forefront of. Our research team has been working on this for the last, I would say, 5-6 years, and then we made a lot of headway with initial pilots and POCs and some initial engagements with some customers, and really understood the space because we don't profess to be an agriculture company, and that's the expertise that our partners like Bayer bring to the table, and we can bring that scale and we can bring the underlying technology that can enable that democratization of technology. And I think this sector is, in a very strange way, one of the oldest industries, one of the fundamental industries that sort of, in a sense, drives the planet. And more importantly, while a lot of us, even inside Microsoft, kind of think of agriculture as just the agriculture companies that sort of sell to farmers and stuff, but it's a very large value chain. There's things that get produced in the farm that are going into things like food, fuel, fiber, and lots of other things, right? And there's a whole value chain that's at play, including CPG companies, retail companies, and the intermediaries that are in the middle that are processing all of that stuff that's coming from farms. And so if you kind of look at the entire value chain, it's a much larger scale. And because the farming part of it, which is where the origin is relatively lower, or I would say relatively behind in terms of digital transformation compared to a lot of other industries. I think that's not a place that we would like to be as a planet, as corporations that are, have a social corporate responsibility, and as individuals as well as consumers. And so we kind of look at that opportunity that moment you start digitizing the entire farm, then everybody in that entire value chain benefits. And the challenge is the technology is limited to a few set of people, including one of them being players like us, and then the core agronomic expertise also limited to some of the larger people. So access to some of the basic things like cross-technology and agronomic expertise should not be limited to just a few people if you really want to make a change across the world. And that's really where meeting of the minds between Bayer and Microsoft, in terms of, in a sense, opening up and making this available to everybody. And that was really the driving force. So what we intend to do is, for the entire agriculture and food value chain, build a set of capabilities that enable a transparent, profitable, and sustainable farm-based food sourcing and supply chain capability that we would essentially build over a period of time. So, and our focus and attention is on enabling farm management and sourcing. And then out of that, the derivative comes around sustainability practices and all the other things that are relevant to other players in the food value chain, like CPG companies and intermediaries companies that are converting that the product that you source from the produce that you source from the farms, and then essentially convert it into value adds. That was essentially the driving force, and we're just getting started. So we're really excited about the possibilities that this offers, and literally a lot of it is white space. Nobody has really attempted to do this at the kind of scale that we're trying to do it at.
Thank you, Vineet. And I really liked your points about scale. And the session is all about getting to scale. And very often we see pilots which never fail, but never scale as well. But I really like the fact that you're taking a long-term vision of getting to scale. And hopefully, with these discussions and bringing other partners on board as well, we will be able to achieve that vision. And I also like the fact that you talked about the whole chain, not just at the farm end, but across the value chain. And that's probably where the next speaker, who's Maria Fujihara from Sinai Technology. She's the founder and CEO of Sinai, which is actually the planet's leading decarbonization platform, working with players across that value chain that Vineet described, and helping by providing data and tools to decarbonize these value chains. So, Maria, can you tell us a bit more about Sinai? And in that context that Sachi and Vineet nicely set out for digitalizing the agricultural sector in response to climate change, where do you fit in?
Yes, of course. So I'm Maria, founder and CEO of Sinai Technologies, and we are a decarbonization platform. We help corporations to decarbonize, so very focused on sustainability and emissions, and the agriculture sector is one of our focus. We help our customers to go beyond carbon accounting and actually find the strategies for decarbonization. So look for the solutions and understand not only what is the potential for reduction, but also how much does it cost to implement each one of the solutions. So we have a software. We do need to collect data inside a system. So the more we see the agriculture sector digitalizing, the easier for us is to do our work. And we actually also closed a partnership with Bayer as well and other companies in the food and agriculture sectors that is associated with collecting data in the supply chain and accounting for emissions in the supply chain. So today, these emissions normally are accounted through life cycle analysis emissions factors, which is numbers that you associate with specific products in the supply chain. But this database is very outdated, and it's literally the only option available up to today. And our partnership was associated with collecting primary data from these corporations and companies and calculate the emissions from each one of these and share the data across these multiple stakeholders. So this actually reduced and increased precision by over 90%, 90. So these existing databases have 90% of error. So this is very important because if companies and farmers and anyone in the supply chain is going to invest money and capital for emissions reductions, they need to know exactly what they are going to be looking for to reduce and how much this is going to cost them. So the biggest difference that I also want to emphasize is that we are now focused on carbon credits, even though for the agriculture sector, this is a great opportunity, especially for farmers to invest on. We actually help customers to create products that have a premium value that can be traded within a premium value, especially for organizations in the value chain that are looking for valuable products that can actually compare products that are carbon neutral or being carbon reduced. So that's it from our side. I'm happy to chat more about this. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Maria. And it's really interesting to see such an innovative business model arriving as well in that transition. So I think if we're talking about a transition, we do need these kind of business models. And it's really cool what you're doing in terms of enabling companies to decarbonize. But another part of that transition is also the role of the public sector and public sector financing. And we're really lucky to have with us today Matthew Reddy, who's the Senior Private Sector Specialist within the Global Environment Facility. And the GEF is a huge source of funding for climate change and biodiversity and nature-related actions in countries across the world. And you're in your 8th replenishment now, and Matthew's been thinking a lot about private sector engagement and scaling up digital tools. So Matthew, would you like to tell us a bit more about how you're approaching this and how we can get to scale?
Yes, thank you, Dhanush, and greetings everyone from sunny Washington, DC today. I like the title of this presentation. It really refers to multi-stakeholder platforms, and I think that's the way we do things in the GEF when it comes to working with the private sector. So, we recognize that multi-stakeholder platforms give us this opportunity to scale, as you say, Dhanush, scale vertically through the value chain. And I think that's an important point as well, because when we talk about the private sector in the GEF, we're talking about the big companies, the Bayers and the Microsofts of the world, but we're also talking about other actors who are smaller in scale, right from the farmers themselves, of course, the cooperatives, and technology providers, such as we've just heard from Maria at Sinai. So that's why we want to work through these vertical approaches. And then, of course, through these horizontal approaches, which enable us to work from the farm scale to the river basin scale to the national scale and even into the broader regional scale. And I've seen a couple of questions in the chat here that reference scale. And I think multi-stakeholder platforms are the way that we can move from working on an individual basis with farmers and companies in a sort of transactional sense to a much broader approach. Now, you mentioned, Dhanush, that we're in our GEF 8. We're moving now, we're closing out GEF 7. And so we're moving into the GEF 8 period, which is our 8th cycle of funding, which will take us from 2022 to 2026. And when we looked back at how we're working with our current, what we call impact programs, and these will be then integrated programs in GEF 8, we did an analysis of who we're working with in the private sector in our food systems, land use and restoration impact program. And yes, we have the traders involved, we've got the banks involved, we have a good representation from the producer communities and certification schemes, etc. But there were two areas that we were quite weak. One was insurance, which was interesting, and the other was technology providers. Given the scale of and importance of technology in our lives, it was really quite remarkable that we'd really lacked this presence and dynamism that the technology providers can bring to the agricultural space. So I think Sachi was right when he said, why can't we do these things in agriculture? And so in GEF 8, what we've done to try and rectify that situation is really look to ways that we can build what we term a digital fabric within the GEF to try and create what we term a digital to environmental dividend, so that we can use the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution to not only deliver on some of the things that we want to see in agriculture and equitable outcomes, but at the same time on important global environmental benefits as they pertain to climate change and nature positive activities. And I just have 1 minute just to highlight two areas where we anticipate doing this. The first is in water, climate and biodiversity fintech. I think that's an area where we can really start to think about how we can support investors, mobilize capital and support intermediaries make resource allocation decisions that can help decarbonize, and especially with that kind of data that's available now to inform especially how the bigger companies can invest upstream and reduce scope 3 emissions, which is a big challenge for us in agriculture and makes up a very large percentage of any company's greenhouse gas emissions profile. And then the second point is in Earth observation, so monitoring and evaluation. And again, we can achieve so much more at scale through satellite observations and remote sensing than we could ever achieve at such a reduced cost. This is a key point. We're doing things in the most expensive way right now. on the ground, analog, low speed. You couldn't, this is the most expensive way. Technology is an expense. This is the cheaper way of achieving things. So, you know, we do need to overcome some of those financial hurdles of CapEx. But I think if we can work on those, and again, this is the role of the public sector to support countries move towards these more efficient systems in partnership with the private sector. The private sector is the provider, they are the bridge. And so we need to be able to work with the private sector through these MSPs to help us deliver this digital to environmental dividend.
Thank you, Matthew. And that was really interesting and exciting as well, you know, the direction that you're going to build this digital fabric within the GEF and getting the digital to environmental dividend working with these multi-stakeholder partnerships. A really exciting period with GEF 8 from 2022 to 2026. I also think we have a bit of a time dividend here. So thank you to all the speakers for being so brief and efficient, which means that we have more time for questions. We have one more speaker, but I just wanted to give an alert to all those who are watching us here on Zoom as well as Hoover to type in your questions. So we'll come to that in due course. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Myrtle Dancer from the Netherlands Food Partnership. NFP is also the host of Climate. So the Netherlands Food Partnership has been developing coalitions in different areas. And one of those areas is around digital ecosystems for smallholder farmers. And there were some interesting questions around Global South, specifically how are these solutions applicable? So over to you, Myrtle, and how are you approaching this from NFP perspective, and particularly in that Global South context to make these solutions accessible?
Yeah, thank you so much, Danush, and also the other members of the panel. It's been a very interesting and informative session. Yeah, so my name is Myrtle Dancer. I'm the Executive Director of the Netherlands Food Partnership. This is a convening platform that was actually initiated with the support of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture. As many of you may know, the Netherlands has a long history in stimulating partnerships to respond to interesting opportunities and big challenges, among others also in the food system. And the Netherlands Food Partnership was created because we also see that there are challenges in making these partnerships being really successful and create the impact that we all desire. So as a convening platform, we do roughly three things. One is that we function as a community engagement platform where we try to inform and create knowledge and better understanding on food system transformation in low and middle income countries. So that can be used for all kinds of parties that are interested in food system transformation in the Global South. The second thing is that we help kickstart certain partner initiation processes for these parties that have an idea or are active in a certain field and need to engage like with other parties. We help to bring these parties together to set the agenda and to move forward. And the third important service we provide is to support collective impact coalitions, which are coalitions that have a very clear idea of where they want to move and how they want to move forward, but need the support really to thrive and to become like very successful and create impact at scale. And yeah, digitalization, digital services, and the connection, of course, to smallholder farmers, but also to other vulnerable groups in the food system in low and middle income countries is actually a cross-cutting theme in this field. So on one hand, just to give an example, we support or facilitate a community of practice on digital for agriculture already for a couple of years. This includes all kinds of practitioners that are active in the Global North and in the Global South on these topics, and together they try to understand certain topics better that they have been challenged with themselves. So one of the topics that we touched upon last year is to reach the last mile. How do we really reach like the very poor or the very vulnerable groups on digital services? Another topic that was important and selected by this group was the business models behind digital services in low and middle income context. And these learning processes lead also sometimes to ideas that are then selected by the partners, and they develop like their own initiatives to move forward with that. On the other hand, we also host a collective impact coalition on digital ecosystem service for smallholders. This was actually a spin-off of the whole discussion on game-changing initiatives around the Food System Summit last year. And there we worked together with parties like Syngenta Foundation, Rabobank, IFAD, the Global Producer Organization, and all these parties have worked in digital ecosystem services for smallholder farmers, but all of them also recognize that they have problems to bring it to scale. They feel challenges to make them also self-sustaining. So they decided to join forces to get like a better understanding of what has worked in practice and see how they can build on that and how they can use their joint forces also really to deliver better on these specific topics. So this year we will work in 4 countries on pilots. Zambia, Indonesia, Kenya, and Colombia. And we specifically chose different countries with different contexts and different states of the arts also on digital ecosystem services for smallholder farmers to have also an explorative environment and be able to compare like results to in these different countries and learn from that and see then how we can replicate and scale up together with these parties.
Thank you, Myrtle. And that was really helpful to get that context and very specifically looking at the context of the Global South. And maybe, Matthew, I wanted to come back to you, and you mentioned this in the Jeff's work as well. So what role do you see for technology transfer from the North to the South, and from companies who are also operating in the North to moving into the Global South? And how does Jeff intend to facilitate that technology transfer?
Yeah, I think this question of technology transfer, I mean, it comes from such ideas as the flexible mechanisms of the CDM, transferring technologies to developing countries. I think the private sector is the main conduit for doing this. I think the private sector must step up, I think, in considering the context in which technology is applied. Obviously, there's no comparison between a farmer in Missouri or a farmer in Western Australia to those that are farming in sub-Saharan Africa, or indeed in small island developing states. So we need to be able to create solutions that are context specific and adapt to the needs of the users. And I think companies like Microsoft and Bayer are really quite good in this space, and especially Microsoft, in the sense that they can create the infrastructure, if you like. They can create the bridges, and it's up to then the locals and organizations and our agency partners to support the facilitate some of the green entrepreneurs and private sector enterprises that can then utilize these facilities. I don't think that there's a cut and paste approach. I think it's more like an approach where the infrastructure is provided, the opportunities for cloud computing, etc., that Microsoft can provide, and then to apply that into the context of developing countries. I think we must be really careful that access to these technologies must be equitable, and sort of transparency and equitability are sort of a yin and yang in this discussion as well, because a lot of these digital technologies do support more open access, the opportunities for more data sharing, etc. So I think this is a consideration as well in this idea of tech transfer. The other one, of course, is it must be the appropriate technology. I think we see too often in developing countries that the technology that's provided is a second-rate technology. I think that's sort of unacceptable. It might be okay in consumer electronics to have a television that's a little bit older for sale, but I don't think that applies in the context of agriculture. I think that we should be working to provide the best possible solutions. And I'll close by saying that when it comes to the types of solutions that we see adopted, we really do need to make sure that they are gender responsive as well and support inclusivity. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that with some of these digital approaches. So a wide range of opportunities that go well beyond environmental benefits and can help support some of those SDG outcomes that we want to see.
Thanks, Matthew. And I really like the point that you made about inclusion and gender equality as well. You know, this was the week of the International Women's Day, and we've been reading a lot about the importance of fostering that. And it's really nice to see that you're thinking about that also from the Jeff perspective. I think it's absolutely crucial in this area. And Mirzel's given an interview on going beyond purple washing and ensuring gender equality in all our efforts, and I think it's quite important, and let's certainly dive a bit deeper into that. So there's actually a question. Yes.
Sorry, I was gonna ask, would I be able to just build on that a little bit? It was in the chat as
Absolutely.
well about Smallholder.
Go on.
So
Suchi.
one of the reasons Microsoft and Bear first started talking was actually around smallholder solutions. And what we define as smallholder is anybody that essentially has a farm operation, half an acre and bigger. And the idea was, why can't we provide technology solutions to them to help them optimize their usage of land, help to educate them in things like fertilizer utilization, et cetera. And so as we continue to work on this, they are a key component of our solutions that we're going to offer. And to be clear, these solutions we're offering are really for other businesses to develop offerings. And so we want to provide capabilities that can be used by the entire industry, which is the scale component, to deliver solutions from the smallest farmer to the largest operation. And the last point Matthew made about inclusion, a lot of those smallholder farmers, as we define them, typically are women and so forth. And so we want to provide them the technologies and capabilities they can utilize to use their land more. One example is I know one of our investment companies as Bear really focuses on educating smallholder farmers around the utilization of fertilizer. And they're seeing massive gains where that moves them from subsistence farming to cash crops. And we want to provide the tools to other companies to do that faster and provide a greater breadth of capabilities to those growers as much as we do to large scale farming operations.
Thanks, Sachi. Thanks so much for coming in and building on that. I want to dive a bit deeper into that point on inclusion with you, Maria, because there was a question also coming in from the audience on whether multi-stakeholder partnerships can indeed be inclusive of smallholder farmers. And what we're hearing from Matthew and from Sachi is that it's certainly possible. But from the perspective that you're coming from into these multi-stakeholder partnerships, how do you see this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important to always think of diversity and inclusion, and not only related to gender, but related to size, age, and this is, I'm talking about companies, right? I think there are multiple companies that need to provide and can provide solutions across the supply chain. And I think it's very hard for one company alone to deliver them all, or to be able to gather all the stakeholders that are needed to achieve anything. So if you are a small or a big stakeholder, I think it's important to connect with everybody in the supply chain and try to understand what are the opportunities that everyone has to collaborate. And like I said, the example, the best example that we have is the one that we recently announced, a partnership with over 10 companies in the supply chain, and now we're going to expand to many more, including smaller stakeholders. And I think, just like we see in a lot of the climate negotiations, and I'm coming a lot from the climate perspective, okay? we see that a lot of the developing countries, they normally help and hold hands with the countries that are under development. And I think it should be the same for the private sector as well, right? So the companies that have been doing this for so long should be hand-holding the ones that are, getting started, and they should be enhancing each other. And I think just to conclude, the final piece that I think it's important to mention is that I think these solutions go much beyond software. I do have a software company, and we are talking a lot about software here, but I think there is a lot of opportunities for hardware, and software doesn't do anything without data. So if we're not collecting data in the ground and bringing the right information from the ground up, software won't be enough. So, and I understand that a lot of people in the ground, farmers and other stakeholders, they also lack access to these specific hardware solutions that are going to be helping them with the data that is needed to support software and decision making. So I think the partnership engagement and multi-stakeholder engagement goes much beyond the software and hardware, and of course, like GEF and other stakeholders that can provide the knowledge and the training and the consultancy that is needed to put everybody on the same page. So yeah, I think this would be the main things that I would care about whenever we talk about multi-stakeholder partnership.
Thank you, Maria. Maybe Vineet, if I can come to you to also build on that a bit. How do you see that divide, in terms of, as Maria put it quite eloquently, we need to collect that data, we need to have that hardware in place. So how do you try to address that gap within your efforts as Microsoft? Maybe a second question, if you're comfortable with that, is there's a question on Web3 technologies. And is this something you're considering as part of your efforts? And if you could comment on both, that'll be very nice.
Sure. Let me attempt the first one. So one's for sure that this is a multi-stakeholder approach that we need to have. And Sachi also mentioned about the fact that we're not only enabling solutions that companies can use themselves, companies that are part of the value chain, but also providers to those companies that would essentially use them as building blocks to do it. So the idea is, in some sense, in some scenarios, even buyers taken the position that they're not the only people who can solve all problems. So that's really heartening to see. For us, that was a very, very big driving force for having this partnership, because you're bringing tech from inside buyer to broadly enable the entire ecosystem and not just buyer itself. So there's a larger aspiration, because if the entire sort of industry moves, then everybody sort of benefits out of that. So the recognition that no one person or no few set of people can solve this problem, there's a lot many more people there. The other part is technology itself, right? Maria mentioned about hardware tech. As you go to small landholder farming, and for that matter, the cost is as much a factor in the magnitude might differ in small landholder farming, but I have yet to find any part of agriculture in the world where the farmer is able to afford a lot of the tech that we're talking about. So there obviously are the people that have to be coming in to sort of bridge that gap. Sometimes it's governments, private stakeholders, and so on and so forth. But AI and machine learning is going to play a big role in that. So one part is getting the data. So we're still in sort of the early phases of making sure that we can bring the data together. And then the other part is that once you have data, then you can use AI and machine learning to sort of scale that without necessarily having to have in a sense, an extensive data source, which is always ideal. But you could essentially use AI and machine learning to fill the gaps that, in a sense, exist because of cost, because of other things. Like, for example, you could instrument a set of farms that look like other set of farms, and then essentially start correlating and use AI and machine learning to do some of those things. And we are seeing some very early examples of the work that we're doing with Bayer today in some markets, where you're seeing some of that, clustering kind of an approach also that can really benefit everybody in the value chain. So that's the first part. The other part, I'm not sure what the question really specifically talks about, what the specific area that the person is really looking at. But I don't know whether it answers, but our intention is that we're building tech in a way that it's highly extensible, right? So it should apply to pretty much any part of the world, any geography, using some of the latest tech, but not just using it just because it's the latest part. Using it in a way that it just makes it very simple and easy for everybody in that entire ecosystem to use and get access to the technology that we're building. Access is really critical. As as people see some of that tech unfold over the course of the next few months and over the course of this whole year and beyond, you will see that we'll just make it so simple to use across all of our Microsoft tech that you can essentially use the underlying platform that we're building. So the access becomes really easy to pretty much everybody. I don't know whether it specifically answers your second question, but we can have separate discussions or sessions for going deeper into the tech that we're building together at the appropriate juncture.
Thank you, Vineet. And that's a good starting point, and maybe others want to come and complement that as well. And the organizers have also said that there's a specific session on Web3 technology. So I would also encourage people to go on to that session to find out more. But thank you, Vineet, for that. So I'd like to just come to you, Myrtle, very quickly, because we've heard from Maria and Vineet on data collection and the magnitude of the challenge and the opportunities as well. But from your perspective, you're also thinking about consistency and principles and common metrics and things like that to ensure standardization amongst data collection efforts as well. So would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I fully agree with the former speakers also that data is crucial, access to technology is crucial, and bring it to the contextual criteria and characteristics where these data and these ICT solutions are being used for the benefit of, for instance, smallholders. So standardization of data is always a difficult topic, because when you get really into detail, it's always contextual. You always have to interpret it in specific context where it is. Often information is being used also in different languages, in different formats and everything. So yeah, what I think is that there are great opportunities to work in multi-stakeholder collaborations, like Vineet also mentioned, where you bring parts together that really have strong competences on certain parts. So just to give an interesting example I've been involved in the past was an initiative that focused on reducing the illegal logging of wood in the Amazon area. And there, big players like the World Resource Institute and Interpol worked together with local organizations that represented indigenous communities. And in the indigenous communities, you had monitors that were collecting information about the invasions that happened in their territories. And the problem was that they were collecting information, but not in the right way to, for instance, start a judicial case against a company that maybe would cause these illegal logging problems. Then Interpol taught them what type of information needed to be collected to prepare a good case. And the World Resource Institute has the Global Forest Watch, which is also which has different tools for handhelds to be able to collect data using satellites and using other technologies to be able to collect this information, or to upload also pictures, for instance, of certain territories and data related to the location where these activities were happening. And what I thought was interesting about this collaboration, that we could really build on everything that already existed, but was useful in a high-tech environment. But with the technologists of the global the Global Research Institute and local NGOs, we were able to really adjust it to the needs of these indigenous community leaders, because they were working in offline areas. There was no internet there, so they had to have solutions in which they could use and collect the data and use the satellite images in that offline area, and then bring it to an online area, like to an internet available area, so they could share that information again then with the bigger databases and everything. So I think that there we could really make like a leapfrog forwards in helping them to improve their data collection and support then the local NGOs and the international organizations to create better data that they could use then, like for their purposes on research, legal cases, and other types of interventions.
Thanks, Myrtle. Sachi, I would like to come back to you also on this topic about data collection, which is getting quite a lot of attention also from the audience. So I can see in the questions. So from a buyer perspective, how are you seeing this? Because I saw the comment that you had, you're working from 1/3 of a hectare to 30,000 hectares, and they are entirely different scales, geographies. So how are you trying to ensure data consistency and standardization across these efforts?
So one of the things I mentioned earlier was there's a high barrier to entry, an artificially high barrier to entry to create digital solutions. And this is driven by primarily data access and data collection. One of the fortunate pieces that Bayer has is climate and climate field view, which has provided us a gateway and access to farmers sharing digital data with us in a pretty frictionless manner. There's a IoT solution that we provide that connects into equipment that collects the data. But this really only addresses large operations, right? It doesn't address the smallholder operations. And so when Matthew mentioned things like remote sensing, satellite imagery, et cetera, what we see is there's a lot of ways to collect data at the different the altitudes you need from smallholder to the large scale operations. But it's really hard to get it all together and then to be able to actually utilize it to develop solutions. And so what we've really been focusing on is how do we take things like open constellation satellite? How do we take things like smartphones that farmers in various nations use and bring that information together to allow people to develop on? And so working with Microsoft, these are the things we're thinking through, bringing all that data together so it could be investigated, thinking through by providing this out there and working with other organizations as well, creating common data standards to make interoperability easier. Again, one of the areas that we really want to highlight with our partnership and collaboration, and it's paramount to scale, is you need interoperability, you need data connectivity, and you need cooperation. And so you're starting to see a lot of emergence that you can't do this on your own. And you're starting to see a lot more cooperation in the last 2 years than you have in the previous 10 around agreeing on what is the data standards for satellite imagery and the way. I mean, here's the two simplest questions that I can ask, and we don't have great answers to. What is the field, and how do I define my crop type, right, or boundaries for the field? And so there's a lot of different ways to think about this. I did not realize this when I first joined agriculture from another industry. And those are the simple problems that we need to align on as an industry to really bring us forward. And so we're doing a lot of work with Microsoft, and others to really unify that vision. And that will allow us to bring data across the systems. And as satellites, as they go up further, more and more into space, more and more constellations, we'll be able to also work on that as smallholders as well, much more efficiently.
Yeah, thank you, Sachi. That's much appreciated. So may I just ask the participants if you could just mute yourself, and if you have any comments, please post them on the chat. I just picked up some background noise. That was really fascinating, Sachi. Thank you so much. Maybe I wanted to, Matthew, I was looking at the excerpt that you shared from the programming directions of Jeff. And I had a specific question, which was last week, the IPCC came out with the report on adaptation. And one of the things that they refer to is that the progress in adaptation has been slower than mitigation. And they're referring to it as the adaptation gap. So on mitigation, we're seeing a lot of progress. It's much easier now, and you refer to the lower cost of technology and lower cost of monitoring, carbon reduction, and so on. But in adaptation, what the report suggests is the action hasn't been that fast. So, seeing all this progress that from private sector is making, how do you think we can use that for adaptation outcomes?
Yeah, Well, I think in a lot of cases, it's rather, and especially in our field, of agriculture, it's rather an artificial divide to say mitigation and adaptation, because so many adaptation benefits in agriculture have a mitigation co-benefit. So my sense is that there's been probably a misrecognition of the value of agriculture over time, and I think we heard a little bit about that, but also that adaptation finance has been somewhat reduced as compared to, say, investments in renewable energy and the kinds of market mechanisms that we've seen in adaptation. But I think through the agricultural lens, we can provide greater opportunities for investment in adaptation. I think these the new types of data applications that we can see, the new agricultural practices that we can see, climate smart agricultural practices in rice, alternate wetting and drying type approaches. These are adaptation benefits that have huge climate change benefits. So I think if we're going to address this adaptation, we should kind of turn things around a little bit in agriculture and say, actually, you're investing in adaptation with a mitigation co-benefit. And I think that's a very strong way to do that. At the same time, building the resilience of farming communities, and of course, hopefully that includes their incomes over the long term as well. So that's why we like very much the climate smart agricultural approach.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And we are reaching the end of the session. We have about nine minutes left. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go around to the speakers and get your sort of closing comments. And specifically, we have over 100 people joining us on multiple platforms. They represent different stakeholder groups, and ideally outcome from this session as we form with interested parties a multi-stakeholder partnership. So think about those different stakeholders who are out there in this panel and beyond, and what would you like from them in the next year or so that we can work together and get this action. And I really like what Sachi said, like in the last 2 years, we've seen a lot more cooperation than the last 10. Can we accelerate it further in this year, and what would you need for that? So I'll just quickly get closing comments from all of you. And just to the audience, please, once the session is over, please provide your feedback on the session using the poll tab on Whova. So Myrtle, your closing comments, please.
Yes, well, I think it's important to further work on this topic. So I'm really happy to see also so much participants of this this event, like being interested in this specific session. I think that it really has to be approached like from a multi-stakeholder perspective. And there we believe very much like focusing on strengthening these partnerships up to a level in which they become impact coalitions. So I would really like to plea also for that, to not assume that if parties work together in a specific project that it then will be successful over a longer term, that it really requires like a special effort to make these collaborations work over time and to create the desired impact at scale. And then I think that indeed like the challenge to really reach out like to the more vulnerable, for instance, smallholder farmers, that requires the engagement of locally based INGOs or locally based organizations that really connect like to these parties, so they can help also to translate what's already out there to the specific context where it needs to be used.
Thanks,
and I thank you
Myrtle.
so much for this opportunity to share a bit of our experiences here. Thank you, Danush.
Thank you, Myrtle. And very clear asks from local organizations, INGOs, to address that barrier that Sachi alluded to at the very beginning. So thanks for that. So I'm turning to you, Vineet. What would you like from other stakeholders in advancing your vision in the next decade or so? You may be on mute, so can you unmute yourself? Okay. If you're having challenges, I can. Oh,
Yeah, I'm now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was not allowing me to unmute myself. Yeah, I think I was thinking as Myrtle was speaking. One of the things I certainly want to see is that there are a lot of companies. I would say startups certainly who are experimenting a lot. What I'd certainly like is governments across the world to be more braver in terms of doing experimentation faster and with speed and alacrity. I have not seen that in any part of the world, frankly, as yet. And I'm being a little controversial here, but I think governments are very critical stakeholder in the agriculture value chain in every market in the world. There isn't anything that you can come across that you do not see. They play a very big role in everything from subsidies to policies to everything else, and their role in enabling technology to, especially in small landholder farming and some of the more economically challenged parts of the world, is a very, very big opportunity for them and for the entire industry. I think I would like to see government stakeholders and associated bodies that are policy makers play a much more deeper and accelerate that whole thing, whether it's in terms of making access available to startups, making all kinds of things that you can think of. I think I would like to see some of that really happening much faster than what it has happened till now.
Yeah, thanks, Vineet. I think that's a really clear ask. And for the governmental stakeholders who are joining us, please take note. And maybe that's something we can work with you together on as well from a climate perspective. So we're really short of time. So I'd like others to also maybe do your ask in like 30 seconds to 1 minute. So Maria?
Yes, I think just to add to Myrtle, because she put it out broadly and very wisely to everyone, I think we also need to think this globally. I'm from Brazil, but I'm based here in California, for example, and I think it's important to bring multiple stakeholders from multiple countries, because this is also how we bring diversity. So that's my 30 seconds.
Thanks, Maria. Very clear. Bring more diversity. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks. I think Vineet makes a very good point about government's role, the role of the public sector, and I think investing in an enabling environment and collaboration, it's always difficult between the public and the private sector. So I think from our side, Vineet, that the work is really needs to be done in trying to bridge that gap with the private sector. So I would like to encourage our private sector partners to work with the GEF, with our implementing agencies, organisations like FAO, WWF, UNEP, etc., who are our implementing agencies to work on some of these solutions in key countries. Thank you. Great session. Thank you, Dhanush.
Thanks, Matthew. And you didn't just make an ask, you also made an offer. So that's much appreciated. Thank you so much to work with the GEF implementing agency to bridge that gap between public and private sector. Great. Thank you, Matthew. Sachi, over to you for the last word.
I appreciate it, Dinesh. And again, thank you for this opportunity and enjoy the conversation with the rest of the folks on the panel. I think my ask is real simple, is the folks that are dealing with trying to solve some of these very difficult challenges, a lot of the startups, especially globally, what are the pain points that are really causing them issues to start implementing their solution or their service or building their service solution, and reach out to us at Bayer, Microsoft, and others to